Hi, everybody. Well, it is the upcoming National Hockey League draft right around the corner, and we wanted to examine what the Phoenix Coyotes may or may not be up to with the general manager, Don Maloney. Don, in terms of the first round and the higher end of the draft in Philadelphia, what position do you think is maybe the position of strength of first rounders and maybe the early portion of the depth of the first round?
Well, you know, Matt, the way we look at it, we like the top end of the first round. If we could get ourselves up in the top 4 or 5 picks, we'd certainly look to do it. Realistically, I don't know how realistic that is for us. I think we're more inclined to move down from our pick at 12 to, depending on how it flows. Right now, there's a lot of big wingers that are going to be out there available. There's some centermen, there's a few defensemen, there's a couple of real skilled European players that sort of fall into our mix. So, you know, these decisions all come down to draft table, what the flow is like, what the phone calls are like. If somebody calls and says, well, I have a pretty good idea what it's going to take to get up to the 7th or 8th spot, but to be honest with you, for us, we think the player at 12 we could, you know, potentially would be as good as what you'll get at 8. And conversely, if we drop down to 15 or 16 or 18, we feel like we can get a player just in sort of equal caliber player. So we're in a great spot. We can be very flexible.
And among that, you mentioned you pick at 12, and I believe, 3 picks in the first 58. So you really are, from an organization standpoint, dealing from strength. But I know in the past there has been that tendency for the organization maybe to move down, pick up additional assets. I guess maybe when you go into a draft weekend, you almost got to be open-minded, right, and see what happens.
Yeah, you know, Matt, leading into the final Friday, that's when the deals all get done in the draft. I had a call today from a team that has a later pick in the first round, asked would we look at trading our 2 seconds to get another pick in the first, which obviously absolutely if the player's there. So I mean, that's how early it does start early, leading into the draft week, draft day, draft table. Generally those deals get, they get done right when it's your time to pick. So it's important to do your homework and to kind of reach out to everybody, let everybody know that, listen, we're very flexible where we're at. I think, like I said to you, I think it's unlikely for us to, I don't think we can move up high enough to make it worth our while to give up a second round pick to move up. So we're probably more likely to entertain the thoughts of moving back in the draft, just like you said, to pick up another asset.
The other thing, too, when you go into a draft, obviously you're looking at your organizational depth. For a long time, people around here have thought that the strength of the Coyotes organization is on the blue line because you got players like, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, you've got Keith Yandle, you've got other players like Connor Murphy and Brandon Gormley that are right at that precipice of finding regular time work in the National Hockey League. So heading in, where do you feel free, forward, defense, position up front, where do you feel you need to improve most?
Matt, I think it's both. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with, Connor Murphy and Brandon Gormley, and you can throw Mike Stone in that mix as a young player. But when you look underneath that, we're really, we don't have many of those A asset young defensemen. So you can say, well, if the Coyote, we end up drafting a defenseman on draft day, all you have to do is take a look at a reserve list and say, yeah, they could use another defenseman that's probably 2 or 3 years away from being pro. Center is always a position of need for us and most teams in the NHL. You can never have enough center icemen. But the key for us is not to pass up a potential front line winger for maybe a third line center iceman. That's always the decision. As much as in one sense you say, should we overdraft centers to get ourselves an area of depth there? But if you're passing up a potential 40 or 50 goal winger and again, you look at a kid like Max Domi as a perfect example. He's got the potential to be a terrific player in this league. To pass up on Max to get maybe a centerman that might turn out to be a third line checker doesn't make sense. So all things being equal, if we could draft the defenseman or a centerman, sure, great. But if we find a winger there that we think could be a frontline player, then that's the route we're going to go.
There are 2 schools of thought. There is one school of thought that teams draft the best player available. Other teams draft by position. What is the philosophy of the Coyotes?
I think Matt, you'll probably see most teams will say the same thing. Best player available, and certainly after you get through the first round or 2, you have to go with that thought. I mean, we've all done draft studies, and skilled, small-skilled Europeans seem to appear in the NHL a little bit more in the later rounds of the draft versus maybe the big, lumbering defensemen per se. But for us, sometimes in the first round early on, where you might look, even though you're drafting on the best case scenario, probably 2 or 3 years out before most players show up in the NHL. You might lean towards a need a little bit. If there's a difference between a centerman or a winger, you might go for a centerman because a centerman is just harder to find. Defensemen are also right-handed shooting defensemen are real commodities if you find a good one. So all things being equal, you might lean that way. But for the most part, what we look at is saying who can be a top-line player, front-line forward, top 2 defenseman pairing. Those are the priorities for us, and it doesn't matter left or right. If we can find the right ones, they'll be great assets going forward.